Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Murphy. I am the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College, and I was drafted into a session by these smarter people to my right. We'll be talking about how domain of one's own and IndiWeb projects relate to the values and ethos of liberal arts education. And what I'd like to do is ask my panelists here to introduce themselves, and we said that one of the things as we prepared for this is that you're going to hear a lot of, well, it's context dependent. So I was going to ask everybody to just in a sentence or two to give some explanation of what the context for the liberal arts that they'll be talking about, what your beliefs or your institution beliefs are.
Oh, I get to start. Okay.
Sorry.
So I'm Sundi Richard. I lead the instructional design team at Davidson College, which is basically our academic technology team, our academic technology and teaching and learning. I know it rests in different places, so that's kind of what we are, and we are that team on campus. Davidson, of course, is a liberal arts college, and as we were talking about what we thought is liberal arts and what our institutions thought is liberal arts and whether those actually connect. So I think I'm pretty happy with how Davidson approaches liberal arts and their mission. One of the statements that they talk about the most is preparing students for leadership and service, lives of leadership and service, and I think that's connected to what I feel is the liberal arts, this idea of you're getting an education in order to serve a wider public, and in order to do that, you really have to know a lot of things in a big spectrum, right? You want to make connections between things. You don't want to just go down one track, and so that's what I really appreciate about the liberal arts, and I would say my 3 words then would be connected, human, and maybe service.
Mm-hmm. Hi, my name is Autumm Caines. I'm an instructional designer at the University of Michigan Dearborn. I think I take a broad approach to the liberal arts in terms of defining it. So I actually have an associate's degree in liberal arts, which seems like kind of a weird thing, from a community college. I'm a non-traditional student. I'm a first-generation high school graduate and a first-generation college graduate thereof. And I'm also a non-traditional student, so I went back to school about 6 years after completing high school and just started taking classes to increase my knowledge. And after some time, took a look at the catalog and realized that I could put this together into a liberal arts degree, which they don't even offer that anymore. It's more like a general education degree is what they call it now. And I think that's because liberal arts has this weight to it, right? So for me, it is about a broad sense of learning, a broad sense of connecting. I think that's true. I also worked in a liberal arts institution for about a decade, a little over a decade, in 2 different liberal arts institutions, Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, and then with Krissy at St. Norbert College for about a year and a half. So I mean, I've been thinking about liberal arts for a really long time, and I have a lot of different contexts that I pull from. Even now that I'm in a Research One institution, but a regional campus of a Research One institution, our chancellor's talking all the time about how we need more liberal arts, that we need to pull from that. So I have a lot of different contexts that I'm pulling things from, so yeah.
I'm Pelzel. I'm the Director of Academic Technology at Grinnell College, which is out on the Iowa Prairie, founded by abolitionists in the mid-19th century. So the quest for social justice has always been part of our identity. We also have, as part of our liberal arts ethos, what we call the individually devised curriculum, what some may call the open curriculum. So after the freshman tutorial, there are no required classes except what you need to complete your major, or as increasingly is the case, your majors, plural. So for us, self-directed inquiry, self-directed learning is very important and very congruent with domains. But we're finding too that I think all of our faculty do a very are very conscious of their responsibility in the advising process to encourage a breadth among our students, even though the enrollment trends and the pressures are more and more students are concentrating in computer science, stats, economics, STEM fields, pre-med kind of things, and so that you can, because of it, we have that kind of open curriculum, you can conceivably get through Grinnell without taking one language, without really taking humanities. So it's really, the kind of a dual-edged sword there. You have to promote that kind of breadth that's sort of consciously adopted by the student with encouragement of their mentors. So it's part of our context.
I'm Krissy Lukens. I am the Director of Academic Technology at St. Norbert College. St. Norbert is a private Catholic liberal arts college in Depew, Wisconsin, which is near Green Bay. And one of the Norbertine ideals is the ideal of communio, which is living in community. And it's something that when we've had accreditors at our college, that's one of the things that they've really spoken to, is that that is something they can feel right away when they step on campus, is the feeling of community and communities within a community. So that's something that I think speaks to our liberal arts tradition, and something that we encourage students to serve their community, whether that's local or the greater community abroad. And while liberal arts isn't necessarily faith-based, our school is. And to me, the intersection of faith and reason is something that draws me to at least the liberal arts as it's represented at our college, and it's very intentional. We had a new science building built 4 years ago now, and in the construction of that building, it was very intentional that the doors, the main doors of the building, looked at the church, and then the other set of doors just opposite that looked out across the river, and that was, to speak to the intersection of faith and reason, and that the two can coincide together. So that's something that speaks to me.
So I will answer for myself quickly as I advance the slide. Just to say that my context is double. Do I need to do anything to refresh that, or?
No.
No. It is. As an undergrad, I went to the Catholic University of America in the late 80s, early 90s, where the core curriculum was extremely restrictive. There were a lot of requirements, and some of them were very spelled out. And now being at Kenyon College, which is closer to the Grinnell side of the very light requirements, after 18 years, I'm still grappling with that a little bit. That there's a part of my brain that is very classically putting courses in boxes and hitting a defined set of subjects, as compared to the kind of the more advising-based, following individual interests and passions. That's most of what we apparently will be discussing today, because it's where we are.
I think it's interesting that critical is the largest one.
No.
And just thinking about what Martin said about, like, what are we going to do about this, right? And being critical is kind of the first step. So hopefully that's where we're at.
And I do see an awful lot of those connections, integrated, interdisciplinary, integrative, collaborative. Well, collaborative is different. But yeah, there are a lot more of those critically building connections. I'm glad that somebody put science in there, not quite as big as humanities and philosophies, and I don't see the fine arts at all. But
There's a math up there, too.
there's a math? Cool.
There's a math.
Math, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, as we think about how we're going to have social solutions to a wide variety of problems that we're also addressing through technology, that's really critical. So
If you just go next. Oh, sorry. It's a different screen. So I think if you just click on, yeah.
Oh, look at that. Cool. Okay. So, and this is a question to Sundi. I was going to blow up the panel, and somebody on the panel said, isn't it nice when people actually follow their abstract? So, so we're going to do that, and this is a question to Sundi asking about how important are the tenets of the liberal arts to your institution as a whole, and how do you see domains or IndieWeb projects having more or less success at the department level or at the whole institution level?
And just to give you a little idea of how we're going to run this, because we want you to take part in this conversation as well, if possible. I mean, you don't have to. But I'm going to kind of answer this question, and then I have a provocation for you all and for the panel. And so I will kind of give out the provocation, and then you can respond to it or not. It has to do with my answer. And we have a ready-made answer here. They don't know what my provocation is, so they actually don't have a ready-made answer, but they are forced to answer, so, you know, the pressure is off you. That's why we have a panel. So that's our...
But we'll shut up if you won't.
If you won't jump in.
You actually have something to say.
You won't get the, yeah.
So again, this panel is about liberal arts and domains, right? And I'm sorry if this is repetition from my other presentation where I talked about Davidson and domains, but we've had a domains project for about 5 years. And it is one of the ones where any faculty or student does get their own domain, their full domain, not just a subdomain. And there have been different people involved in the project through the 5 years. It really was started with a lot of drive from a faculty member, because Mark Sample from our digital studies department did get the grants to start it. And so that is a really big factor, I think, in our school. Now, domains, we talk a lot here about the IndieWeb, and having things be indie, they kind of have to be grassroots, right? They kind of have to be people doing things in a very free kind of way where they feel like they have their own reasons to blog or to do different things. That paired with trying to run domains at a school where you have to pay for it is a kind of hard matching. It's hard to do those two things at the same time. And a lot of times people right away for domains are like, how can we get every student signed up? Writing 101, let's do it, every freshman. And that sounds good until you do it and we realize that all our students are connecting domains with class as the #1 place where they understand what that space is. So how do you decouple that? And I would say we've tried at a department level, and I don't think that's the answer. I don't think doing every single student as a first year is the answer. I will say I don't have the answer, but one way I've seen it kind of have that spirit of the IndieWeb. We started with a group of, this was a kind of extracurricular group who were all going to East Asia to do a community trip of some sort. And so this is connected to their courses, but it's not really. And so we worked with career, not with their professor, in order to say, hey, you're going to have to make reflections about this experience. How about you do it on your domain? And we have started to try out that this year. I don't know how it will go. I don't know what kind of connections those students will make. But I will say that several students from that group came up to me after in like a different context, and they were like, that was so cool. Like, I'm so excited that I'm going to be able to use this and do this thing. And so when I hear things like that, I see that as possibility. And so I think there is some way of coming at this, but I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all, and this is how you do it, and everybody should have fun. My provocation is then asking you, is it possible to have an institutional domains project and truly be IndieWeb at the same time? Are those two things actually possible together? And we have 2 students in the audience and well, she's not a student.
Oh, really?
A former student. And so, and Adele and Cassie talked about like how free they feel using their domains or blogging or doing these different things in other contexts. So feel free to jump in from your perspective as well. Yeah.
I think the answer is yes, depending on what institutional means. So if within your institution, digital learning is defined as is organized around values in favor of student voice, student agency, open education, open learning, open pedagogy. If those institutional values organize in favor of domains, I think it can work. Because with an institutional value that favors agency, voice, is also going to accept that this can't be mandated, this can't be, the expectation cannot be everyone is doing it, and then in a heartbeat it becomes not about student agency, it becomes an institutional initiative serving the purposes of the institution. But I think if you can work at that level of defining, shaping, and then really protecting those values around digital learning in favor of student agency, then something like a kind of program level or a department level or initiative level can live within that space.
So as Sundi mentioned, my name's Annie. I actually worked with Sundi in half the last 2 years. I graduated from Davidson in 2017 and I'm currently a fellow at Davidson. So I've sat in this really interesting I was a student and then I saw like how the sausage was made. So very seen it all, I feel like, at this point. And I think this question of when I don't know that much about IndiWeb, but when thinking about grassroots movements, it's all about gatekeeping, like who has access to this information and this decision making. And in order for it to be a student grassroots movement, so you have to remove the gatekeeping of how do you learn about domains, who's telling it, how are they directing you to use it, and then also how you get access to it. Is it a process that involves a lot of interacting with the bureaucratic institution, or is it a process that you learn from your friend? And I think that's when you transition to having a grassroots student movement be part of the domain, because think about student spaces, they don't intersect with the bureaucratic nonsense a lot of times for a lot of reasons, mostly because it's hidden. And so if you move domains in this bureaucratic or staff or professional space, it's hidden behind these invisible structures. So I think in order for students to really have it as a grassroots movement, you have to remove that gatekeeping. I'm not sure how you do that, or at Davidson even, but I think that's the process that would have to happen.
One of the gates that I've been thinking about over the last couple of days is we've heard a couple of student testimonials that are basically, we don't have time for for something that we see as one more thing.
Yeah.
That's me restating, but that's kind of what I heard. I think that relates is the how do we make sure this is not one more thing, but that this is a tool that can authentically integrate into whatever the other things are that you're doing is kind of a neat portion of that question too. Because there's no more valuable or scarce resource on any of our campuses than student time. And actually not even time, but attention. Student attention is really the most precious thing we've got.
This also makes me, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you get. Okay. Well, I'm a senior at Mary Washington, and I'm also a tutor at the Digital Knowledge Center. And I don't know if this answers any question, but I have noticed, like, as we're trying to make the Domain of One's Own program more widespread and aware to students, we have a freshman seminar, and so they learn, like, the basics of college and how to do a college class. And in that, we're starting to integrate a lot of professors using Domain of One's Own and trying to integrate that into their classroom. But then we have students who come their junior or senior year, they come back to the DKC having a different problem or a different class where they need to use their domain again. And they're like, well, I have this domain, I don't really know, I used it for my freshman seminar, but we just kind of posted a couple times and that was it. And so there is that now connect with domains and just like the classes.
Oh, yeah.
And then when we show them that they can do it for so much more, they're like, why didn't I know this sooner? And so we're trying to find, I guess, the balance of getting the program more widespread while also keeping it, saying what you can actually do with it. So that's an interesting balance that we're still working on. But.
And do you see maybe, like the Knowledge Center is one of the most developed like student groups who work with domains, right? And I think a lot of people have modeled our programs after.
Yeah.
Do you think that can be the core? Like, what if you all introduced it to students and it wasn't as a first-year seminar? It was literally like, or have you had any success in like you being the face of it or the first time that students see it or know about it?
Yeah, I mean, even the Digital Knowledge Center, we're still gaining popularity. So for a while, like before I even worked there, I didn't even know it existed. But now people are actually figuring out where we are, because it's kind of like up in a corner, like in the building.
Yeah.
But gaining momentum, like with different upper level courses that are starting to incorporate having domains as well, is helping that. But also, I'm part of the Domain Fellows program that we have, which we get to basically make a domain for our own, just like have fun with it and make our own project to spread awareness. And I think that's definitely gaining more momentum that shows a different aspect of it outside of the classroom. Because we set up in like a public space, we set up a little booth and people can come up, and we have a lot more lately, like this past couple semesters. People would come up saying, oh, I already have a domain, I don't need to set it up. And we'll be able to explain to them, hey, there's so much more you can do with it. You already have it. You have it for the rest of your time here at Mary Washington, and it's free. So you get a professional website for free. We like tell them like that. And then when you graduate, we always say we hand the reins over to you and you have this fully made website at your disposal. And they're like, oh yeah, I gotta get back to using that. So being able to advocate it in a different platform, in a different space like that has definitely helped outside of the classroom. Thank you.
We should probably move on. So this leads to some interesting questions about ownership. And our question for Mo is how the idea of ownership, as advanced by domain of one's own, and the idea of independence around IndieWeb align or diverge with liberal arts ethos.
So the way I ought to approach this is that, we're all, I think, in agreement and have some enthusiasm for the concepts of ownership, of independence, of agency, but that the liberal arts ethos has never sort of exist out there in the wild in the kind of pure, unadulterated state. It's always situated within our institutions that have other priorities that sometimes don't necessarily align with those values. All of our institutions face questions about financial sustainability and even survival, risk management, reputation management, security, and so forth. And those things complicate the sense of ownership and independence that we might think of. A couple of quick examples. One of the sites we have hosted on our sites.grinnell.edu platform is called Mapping Islamophobia. It's a project by one of our religious studies professors. It's gotten some national attention. It's won a couple of awards from DH organizations. It's unfortunate that this is a project that would need to exist, but it documents hate crimes and other sort of incidences of anti-Islamic events and behaviors. The interesting thing is, if you go to that website, it's the URL is mappingislamophobia.org. So what's missing in that URL is any reference to Grinnell College. And if you go to the landing page there, you will also not see any reference to Grinnell College. Yet it is hosted on a site that the college pays for. Professor, and this is a long-term project that a number of students and staff have worked on as well. So, one of the issues that came up, I was asked this spring, do we need to have college branding or college logo on that site? So, normally, our policy is all the sites have sites.grinnell.edu in their address. And in this case, we made an exception, and by using an add-on domain within that account. And so, that raises the question of, what is the ownership of this project? How much does that rest with the faculty member, with the people who contributed to it, and with the college? Another quick example that raises and complicates those issues is not at our school, but one that I came across last fall here in North Carolina. At the University of North Carolina, there was a student who had a site called Anti-Racist Jeopardy! Now, you may be familiar with the situation at UNC, the Silent Sam, the Confederate monuments, a larger conversation about the legacy of the university and its complicity with racism. And one of the students created a very simple website using Google Slides with a Jeopardy board. You know, I don't think there were any data doubles in it, but they had all the categories, questions and answers around investigating and exploring the university's practices, history, recent incidents of protest and things like that. And it is hosted, the site is jeopardy.web.unc.edu. And at some point, awareness of this filtered up to higher level administrators, and they ordered that it be taken down. And you can read about, if you go to that site, again, jeopardy.web.unc.edu, there's also a link there to an article on Inside Higher Ed. You can read more about it. But after several weeks of sort of negotiation, the student working with their advisor and some outside interest groups in terms of civil liberties, eventually the university was forced to acknowledge that this did not violate the terms of service. And that, so the website's back up. So you can go there and play Jeopardy again. So again, it's ownership, agency. Again, who owned that website, and how is that negotiated between the institution, the students, the professor? And I think that's part of something that's even a larger issue in our culture. I was reminded when I was thinking about this a few years ago when President Obama, happy memory, was running for re-election. He was giving a speech in which he used the phrase, "You didn't build that." Now he's talking about the need for the more affluent members of our society, business owners, entrepreneurs, to pay a fair share to support the public good upon which their businesses rely. And of course, he was widely pilloried by his opponents. But what he meant was, the conditions for the possibility of even being an entrepreneur or having a business are a public infrastructure, technological communications, transportation infrastructure, public policies. So he said, you didn't build that. Of course, yeah, you did build a business, but you built it within this larger framework that's supporting all the things that are needed for a successful business. So in some sense, we could say, in the sense with domains, while we promote the idea of indie and agency, we could say, you didn't build that. And in a sense, that's my provocation, I guess, is to say, there is no such thing in that sense as the indie web. There's only an inter-independent web, in a sense. Because any notion of ownership, of independent, or of agency has to be in that larger context of, what are the responsibilities of ownership? What are the obligations of ownership? And, the agency, as highly we value that, it's always exercised with, it's never in isolation, but in some sort of social context. So I think those are some of the kind of questions that we discovered that, we have to wrestle with as we try to promote our domains initiative at Grinnell. So I don't know how provocative that is, but that's fine.
One of the things that I have thought about a lot in thinking about domains, and Caines is not a domain school, although we are a Reclaim customer, is that almost all of the projects I touch are group authors. They are not single author works. They're class projects, is what I mean. And I think that really complicates this question of ownership. My understanding of the U.S. copyright law is that every author owns 100% of the work. So it's a nice little producer's situation. But I think this is one of the really interesting questions when you get into that interdependence, that the sites where a group of people are all contributing and all have a stake in it. some of these relationships between a department and a student complicate some things that are very easy to say about you should own your own web. When you should own your own web, it's only a web if it's touching other things.
Yeah, and I think that's true even if you're not on an institutionally provided platform. Even if you went to Reclaim and said, I'm going to get my own account and put up anti-racist Jeopardy or mapping Islamophobia, those questions would still be there.
Yeah, and, mostly a +1, because when this question came up, that's my reflexive reaction, is these words of ownership and independence sort of mushed together in the weird American hyper-individualist capitalist system. And I'm sorry to put my hammer and sickle in my sleeve here, but yeah, that should be the point, is the connections. So yes, to what I'm saying.
And maybe the liberal arts traditions with our language and our traditions of thought are particularly well situated to do this kind of deeper exploration of what these concepts mean.
I'll say that one of the things that I really love about a domains project is that I have a real problem with deploying a domains project without, at the same time, having some kind of conversation around what I've called for a long time digital citizenship, but is a problematic term, which some people call the pro-social web, which, you know, has a bunch of different names. But what does it mean to have rights and responsibilities on the web? What are those rights and responsibilities as an individual? What do we have from the community? And also maybe flipping the idea of ownership over to stewardship. And what does it mean to cultivate? What does it mean to care for an environment?
Yeah, cultivation.
Yeah.
So I'm at Whittier College, where we've been a domain school for a while now. We started 5 or 6 years ago at their Digital Arts project. We're currently going through campus-wide curricular reform, and I happen to be on that curriculum committee. And one of the things that we're sort of wrestling with some of the themes and the aims that we want to have to sort of, you know, flavor our curriculum. And one of the things that we're putting into it, we're calling digital leadership, which is probably along the lines of what you're getting at there, thinking about, you know, getting the students to think about their digital identity in some way and have ownership about and agency over how they appear on the web. And in the back of my mind, I've always been thinking like, yeah, we're going to do something with domains. But hearing this, it seems like, you know, especially making it part of like a first year seminar or something like that, that we have to be careful about how we integrate this into the curriculum if we do, because we want it to be something where the students are making a choice and they're not feeling obligated to do something. Because then, right, I hear this, if you're forcing the students to do this on the web, then how much agency are you really giving them, right?
Yeah. And I think especially if that's not the specific conversation, right? So if I'm doing a class in digital studies, if I'm doing a class in pro-social web or web stewardship or something like that, I think that's different because that's then the content of the thing that we're talking about. We can talk about the messy environments on the web. We can talk about what it means to care for the web, to care for each other on the web. But if we're talking about something else, if we have a completely different topic, but we're just using the web as a tool, if it's just this thing that's on the side, I do think that becomes problematic. But the other thing that I love about domains, though, is that I think domains forces that conversation. Like, if you're gonna do it, like, this stuff's gonna come up, right? And so it's great to think about it on the front end, right, and lead with that. But if you're not leading with that, then you're going to catch it on the back end. And that's not going to be pleasant, but at least it's going to happen. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, listening to you and the comment from Whittier, you know, I was thinking that like an institution like yours, Mo, like you're kind of ideally, it's kind of an ideal context. You don't have a gen ed curriculum.
Right.
And so if you're an institution that has already embraced the role of the student in constructing a liberal arts experience, you're not prescribing GARs. That seems to me just ideal ground upon which to say, in that same spirit, here's domain of one's own. alongside potentially a variety of other kinds of practices that students have access to enact the liberal arts on their own terms. Other institutions have different contexts, but I think whatever that context is locally that allows the looseness to remain, right? So not pinning it to a first-year seminar program or a senior capstone program, whatever allows it to continue to breathe and for students to breathe the life into it that makes sense for whatever their work is. That's what you need to grab hold of and protect.
Yeah, I need you to cover your belt. Because ironically, paradoxically, we have restrictions on how students can acquire domains. Normally, it's only as part of maybe a subdirectory of a program. It's like global studies or study abroad thing. And again, it's that institutional wariness, and we haven't worked out fully our web governance policy, and so it's kind of not quite there yet. It's very frustrating for me. But yeah, I agree.
I'd like to move on to our question for Krissy, which addresses some of the questions about how domain of one's own and IndieWeb ideas align with liberal arts tenets in curricular as well as co-curricular uses, which we've bounced around a little bit. But what uses are directly pedagogical and which are coming from other cultures, student or non-student, that impact our campuses?
So when I reflected on this question, one of the first things that I had done was come to each of our institutions and dug a little deeper in terms of how we each identify as a liberal arts institution, but I won't repeat that because we've all gone through that already. But I just happened to have last night in my purse, I even pulled it out, and it was the AACNU pamphlet on what is a liberal arts education. And as a fun little game, if you ever want to play, what do you have hiding in your purse? I tend to pull out some interesting things every now and then. I can talk about that later. But according to AACNU, a liberal arts education helps students develop a sense of social responsibility as well as strong and transferable intellectual and practical skills such as communication, analytical, and problem-solving skills, and a demonstrated ability to apply knowledge and skills in real-world settings. I also then went to Reclaim Posting to dig a little deeper into what they believe, and I pulled out some of these highlights. Making web posting easy and approachable to everyone, friendly and fun. We encourage learning and growth. Teach a person, they use the teach a person to fish metaphor. Practicing open communication, checking in, staying honest, keeping in tune, providing a safe space to disagree, ask questions, and take risks. And their team members are expected to go above and beyond. And when I was thinking about that, I think those are very much in line, that the practices of domain of one's own and IndieWeb definitely align with the tenets of what we describe as liberal arts education. And I would argue that in most cases, curricular applications, if done well, serve as a gateway to co-curricular applications of domain of one's own. But my question, as I reflected on this further, was actually more along the lines, and it might deviate a little bit from the question that we have posted, but how we can help students embrace kind of this pivotal shift in their learning, that to help students embrace the agency that calls for them to bravely share their learning and their knowledge creation openly on the web. And in a student panel that we had at St. Norbert a year ago, one of the students had commented, that, and he was going to be a senior, so he was 3 years into his education already. He was like, what do I have to share on the web? Was his thinking. And then all of a sudden, it was like he had this revelation where it's like, well, I guess I've got a lot to share. And as I was sharing with my panel here last night, I was like, I feel very hypocritical even asking this question because true confessions, I don't blog. And so, what have I shared on the web? And yet, this is something I wrestle with regularly. Like, do we, as educators, as students, have a responsibility to share our learning openly online? Because otherwise, we are always taking and not giving back. And how do we help students to see that?
I'm sorry, you've just in this moment reminded me that our colleague Terry Green runs a couple of neat sites called the Open Faculty Patch Book and the Open Learner Patch Book. And he gives presentations and talks about them, and he always has a slide that says the ghost patches that I have been promised that are coming someday. And my name is always on that patch. And then he takes a picture of it and he tweets it at me to say, where's my article? So I just don't want, I don't want you to feel like you're the only person that even has someone out there saying, you told me you had an idea, wait, put a period on it, come on. But I think part of this is also a question about which communities, it's the time and attention question again. Which communities am I going to give to and how? In ways that will make me happiest and be most productive.
And I think I said this to you last night, Krissy, that for me, it's not about putting things out in public necessarily. It's about the option to put things out in public. And it's about thinking about grappling with considering what parts of yourself you want to put online, what parts of yourself you have time to manage. And so that again goes back to the stewardship piece, right? Realizing that you have, this is a responsibility when you put something out into the on the web. If you're trying to cultivate an audience, you're going to affect that audience. And so there's time, there's energy that you're going to have to give. Do you have that time? Do you have that energy? What's the responsibilities that go into that? How much of yourself are you willing to give? Some people are in vulnerable situations where they can't give parts of themselves in that way. They can't give their real identity because that's a vulnerable situation. And I think you have done that part, right? You have grappled with, what does it mean to have a digital identity? What does it mean for me to be on the web? And that's really what I want to see students do. I really want to see students just go through that process. Go through that process of thinking about, what parts of myself am I going to share and what parts of myself am I going to keep private. And so I think it can be a wonderful model from that perspective. And I think that's the bigger perspective for me.
I think a good example of that too comes from Davidson, and I don't know if, I'm sure most of the people here know who Andy Reichert is, right? Who was a Davidson student, and he wrote the article, "Is it my domain if it gets graded?" And if you look up his domain now, there's not much on there. So he, and Annie, you might say more to this because you know him better than I do, of course. But he's gone through that process and made different decisions about what he wants out there and what not. So he's been through the process. We can't see that process necessarily because now he's decided to be more private about what he has out there. But that was a decision and not probably lightly taken. I'm sure he went through a process.
It was a long process, and everything of his digital identity that he could take down, he took down. I was a roommate of mine. But yeah, it was definitely interesting because now he's teaching in the Middle East, he's teaching English in the Middle East, and he very deviated from where he thought he wanted to go, and so he has slowly been reaching out and is trying to build, it's this very intentional building of what his academic digital identity looks like, where he like is talking to like 12 people or something on Twitter, like everything's super private, and so it was this complete like almost like restart button, which is very interesting. And just because I was friends with him, I've been able to see that process, but from the outside, that's it, you're just like left with what happened.
Right.
For me, this also comes back to the problematic metric of when people implement a domains project, they want to use like, well, what happens after graduation? Do they keep the domain after graduation as the metric for success? And I just think that's a really bad metric. Because I think at the end of the day, it's, you know, well, even if they decided to take everything down, I still think that's success if they're making that choice. Did we have a question?
It's not a question, it sparked my thinking about this, the digital identity question, the grappling with public and private selves in this, what is domains. I think it feels like even domains in some ways had an arc to it, right, where we were all kind of rushed in. I remember, you know, probably 9 years ago, we set up a multi-site WordPress instance, and there was a lot of enthusiasm about everybody's going to get a site as a subdomain. And I suppose that where we are today in, you know, kind of the politics and what's going on, there's been this real shift, obviously, right, in what's going on in the country. And there was an article recently about kind of the dark forest theory of what's going on. If you think about it, there's a retreat, people are retreating from the public open web in some respects and going to different kinds of spaces. So, for example, newsletters, using different forms to reach out. And it sounds kind of like what what the story of Andy's experience with the web as well. So, kind of thinking like it's not just about openness; it's also about cultivating the community in the space, and there's different tools out there besides just put up a full open site. So kind of exploring that too, I think, is really kind of intriguing.
We should move to our last question. Thank you. What's that?
We promised we wouldn't get to it.
Oh, well, you can try to prompt some more questions if you want to get that. So I guess we put this in to be the dark question, but we seem to have gotten there anyway. But this is kind of the logistical question. What struggles do you see getting buy-in for Domain of One's Own and IndieWeb projects from other places on campus, whether that's faculty, mid-level administration, library, teaching centers, assessment centers? I guess I would restate that last question as, what do they see when we bring them these kinds of things, and why do we either get buy-in or resistance? Might be where I go with that.
Yeah.
But it's your question.
Yeah, so I feel like I have struggled with this in terms of the first institution that I was at when I first became passionate about domains, which, I do struggle, like, is it just me? And I'm really happy that you're all here because it tells me it's not just me. Right? Like it is something that is important to the world. After getting the associate's degree in liberal arts, I then got a 2-year certificate in web design and development. So that's those were my starts, right? And then I went on to get the bachelor's degree and the master's degree and that kind of thing. But that was kind of my start, was like liberal arts and web development. Those are my first 2 degrees, and so it really fits really nicely. But yeah, when I have gone to, administrators who are outside of the context of the people who are in this room or know about the stuff that's going on with the people in this room, I've struggled to be able to relate to them that there is a connection here. It's almost like there's a stigma around the tech part of it, right? There's no way that the tech can really be humanistic, right? There's like this divorce between this hard kind of line between the technology and the humanity, and kind of like a refusal to recognize, well, it's the people who built the technology, so of course the technology has humanistic qualities inside of it. And I have studied the philosophy behind some of this stuff that does look at mechanistic measures, and I do agree that technology can, be overtaken, but I feel like it's more prone to doing that when you ignore it. It's more prone to doing that when you don't get involved, when you don't become a part of it and bring that humanistic piece back into it. And so, yeah, my provocation is, how do we have these conversations? How do we show that that something like domains belongs in the liberal arts?
I'm sort of wringing my hands because I know we're being recorded, right? So I say this after 4 years of cultivating a space for domains on my campus. I would not have said this 4 years ago. One of the things I have learned to try to be comfortable with are the multiple stories people bring to domains. So my provost has a story about domains that's all about e-portfolios.
Right.
And I really give a lot of credit to Kristen Eshelman, who in a conference call with her, with my provost, 4.5 years ago, she really caught on that what mattered to my provost was e-portfolios and assessments. And so she kind of talked a lot about Davidson's experience with e-portfolios and why domains is a logical extension. So I just have to be comfortable with a real obsession with e-portfolios and domains, and know that that does not speak to the whole of what we do. But it is what allows the provost to unapologetically, unambiguously support what we're doing. The president has this whole other story about domains. But I also have to get comfortable with the fact that he doesn't have the time to be messing with what we're actually doing with domains. And so we let his story about domains just kind of live out there, and provide the important talking points for when he might actually say something public about domains, so that he's not harming or undermining the thing that we're trying to achieve. And then even among faculty, they have different stories about the purpose and the goal of domains. And so I think what over 4 years we've gotten comfortable with allowing stakeholders to define their stake in domains on their own terms, and to just allow that, and to check in with folks when those stories might actually be at odds with the sort of real story, I'm going to say. And students themselves as stakeholders bring different stories to why domains matters for them, and just kind of allowing those multiple stories to coexist.
I love that framing so much.
Yeah, that's great. What is your president's story?
Well, it's all about kind of advantage, the sort of market advantage of students who've developed these digital competencies, which is his language. And so we certainly recognize that the skills and the practices and the ways of being on the web and making the web that students develop are obviously going to be valuable to them as they leave the college. But we are not primarily defining our initiative around market advantage. But I sort of now soften my shoulders when I'm in meetings with him and just allow him to speak in those terms, and recognize that this is the story he needs to be able to tell to support this work. So, okay.
I feel like we've had similar experiences, and it's sometimes I wonder when we say domains, is it noun or adjective? And it's interesting even to hear sometimes that for those that haven't dove into domains, to even kind of fumble over the word, especially the acronym. But people get on board with digital citizenship, digital literacies, digital competencies. Who can argue against that? So it's, I think when we use that as some of the buy-in, it's a winner. But I still want people to grapple with kind of that, is it an adjective reference with domains, and that can take time and it can get messy. But kind of going back to even reclaims, friendly and fun, it should be fun, and it should be a messy, fun learning experience like the liberal arts education is.
I think it's really interesting when you look at this list of who do you need buy-in from. Students aren't mentioned on it, and I think when you hear about, they're arguably, once you have it, they're the hardest people to get buy-in from, because it's the most valuable thing they have is, scarce resources, their time and attention. So thinking about the stories that you use for your provost and your president, what stories are you using for your students? And you can't expect one to work because there's no class that all students love. So I think when coming back to this gatekeeping metaphor, you need to not even just get rid of the gates, but you need to create so many gates that every student can see a version of domains for themselves. And I think that's that kind of creating as many possibilities as possible should really, I think, should be the goal of domains if you're trying to get to that ethos of every single person has their story about domain. And so just being able to say, great, instead of just the provost and the president, every student has their own story as well. So I think that's the hard, again, don't know how you do it, but ideals, that's would be really cool.
Well, you've really brought it full circle for me, because my thinking when you were talking earlier to Sundi's provocation was that, we recognize the value, I think in the liberal arts especially, we recognize the value that learning happens in all of these different places, not just in the classroom, that the classroom is one place where learning happens. That you can have learning experiences in social situations around campus. You can have learning experiences in study abroad. You can have learning experiences in conjunction with community. And so what domains kind of gives me, or the question that it poses is, how do we create learning what does that look like in digital spaces? Right? And you can't, learning happens in many places, domains happen in many places, domains can happen in the classroom, but how do we have domains in other spaces? Right?
That's pretty close to
Yeah.
time.
Is that our time?
We have one last.
We did.
Oh, yeah.
A quick one more. We kind of wanted to do a
Bring it back around.
bring it back around.
Of what we did in the beginning.
Maybe it's the same thing. But we want to kind of compare the first and the second. Take my phone so I can answer. It's time.
Yeah. Thank you all so very much. Thank you so much. Your friends.